All right, so the export control classification number is going to tell us a few things. It's going to tell us what items are controlled. So you look at the entry for that classification number, and it's going to say optical sighting devices. And then it has a description of the things that are controlled there. It'll tell you what the reasons for control are. This is another point where people get kind of a little confused because they're going to see something that says missile technology. It's got a missile technology control, and you know, everybody thinks, well, I'm not sending this. It's not going to be used in a missile, so that doesn't really apply to me. It's not, the control is not what your item is going for. The control is what your item could be used in. So when we say that there's a missile technology control for that particular item, it's because there is a potential use for that item in a missile, right? So we want to prevent that going certain places because we don't know if it's actually going to go for that particular end use or not, or something like that. So that's why we have concern with certain items going to certain destinations. It's going to tell you which destinations are going to require a license, and you're going to do that by looking at those reasons for control and then looking at the commerce country chart and seeing if it lines up. If there's an X in the box in the commerce country chart for the reason for control for your particular item. And then it also tells you what, if any, list-based license exceptions might apply for that transaction. And when Paul goes through an ECCN with you guys here in a little bit, you'll actually be able to see what I'm talking about there, where it shows that, you know, the listed or license exceptions that might potentially be available for that particular classification number. All right, so this is the structure of an ECCN. This is what I'm talking about. The 1 here is the category. C is the product group. So if we go back and we look, we can say that it's a material, chemical, microorganism, or toxin, and that it's going to be a material, right? So it's not an end item, it's not a test inspection equipment, it's not software for that, it's actually a material, right? So, and then you have 350 is going to be the type of control. The type of control is going to be anything from, you know, national security, missile technology. You have your nuclear non-proliferation, chemical and biological. So you can see how those are the last 3 digits kind of determine what the reason for control is. So the 000 to 099 is going to be a national security control. 350 in this instance is going to be a chemical and biological control. You also have your 500 series, so 500 to 599 are national security for foreign policy, and 600 to 699 are Wassenaar arrangement munitions list control. So the 500 and 600 series items are items that just recently came over. Well, I say recently, but it's been in the last 6 or 7 years. So with export administration regulations, or I'm sorry, the ECR, or yeah, ECR. In the last administration, there was a big push to get a lot of items off of the USML, the ITAR, so the state-controlled items. We wanted to get a lot of the parts and components, the nuts and the bolts, off of that list and over to our control. So that's what these items are. These are literally nuts and bolts for, you know, ITAR-controlled items. So that's in there. One of the things that you're going to want to do when you're reviewing this is you are going to want to make sure that you're not a 600 series or a 500 series control, specifically because they are, because of their nature, controlled a little bit more strictly than the rest of the categories or the reasons for control here. And then you have the 900 to 999 are anti-terrorism, crime control, regional stability, short supply, UN sanctions, things like that. So it generally is going to go from highest to lowest, except in the instance of the 500 and 600 series there. So reasons for control, we have anti-terrorism, chem bio, you have regional stability, national security, crime control. I mean, this is a list of those reasons for control. Again, when we say it's a reason for control, we're not saying that it's because your product is going for that particular reason. So if we say it's for nuclear nonproliferation, that doesn't mean that we think that your widget is actually going for a nuclear weapons manufacturer or something like that. It's just we're saying that it possibly could be used for that, and so we have concerns about it going to certain destinations. The same for missile technology and stuff like that. Showing here that the categories or the product groups generally are going to be grouped together. So if you have a 3A001 end item, the test, inspection, and production equipment would generally be 3B001, and the materials would be 3C001. There are some exceptions to that, but typically in the ECCNs, we're going to tell you kind of where to go to look for that. Like if the technology is a little bit different, if it's not 3E001, generally we're going to lead you to that in that 3A category, the 3A001. There will be a note in there saying for the technology, for the use of this, go to this entry. But typically it's going to be just like this, where you have that technology is going to line up exactly like the end item ECCN.
So again, on the structure, here's an example, ECC9A001. So under category 9, that is aerospace and propulsion. The next category, A, indicates systems, equipment, and components. So it's an actual article, end-use article. Then we see that 0. When you see a low number in that position, in that third character position, the lower that number, the stronger, typically the stronger the control. 0 stands for national security reasons as the reason for control. Also, Adam mentioned in the categories 5 and 6, that's where you have the old ITAR or the old U.S. munitions list. So those also are tightly controlled, but just as a rule of thumb, the lower those 3 digits are, the stronger the control. Okay, now reading an ECCN. The structure of an ECCN will provide different guidance or pieces of information to guide you through to see if that ECCN might be applicable. The first is the heading. That would be a general description of what the article is. Reasons for control. Adam has talked about that, anti-terrorism, national security. And I'm also going to take you and show a copy of the country chart that Adam referred to, because once you have, if you determine that the article falls within that provision, in other words, you've classified it, it falls within a particular ECCN alphanumerical provision, then you look at the reason for control, and that reason for control then has to be compared to the countries that are controlled for export for that product. I'll walk you through that. Then there's what's called list-based exceptions. An example is a low value item. Certain classifications have an exception where, say, it's below $500 in value, you don't have to get a license for it. Whether there are any related controls within the provision itself, it's typical that if the article is controlled, then the technology, which would be a related item, is also controlled. And then within the provision, you could find the list of items that are controlled within that provision, or the types of products that are controlled. It's a description of the controlled product. The classification process, and again, that's really what I'll be talking about, but some of the tools that are available for use, there is an index, basically a table of contents, and it is helpful to review that, even as a starting point to, if you have a description of your article or your item or your software, you can check the index first. You can also, the CCL is available in a PDF document, and it's very helpful to just do a keyword search And in fact, I recommend that, that you do all of these things as part of your due diligence to see if your product is on this list. So again, you'll come up with likely a few different candidate provisions, is the terminology here, but you don't want to just grab the first one you see, as we'll talk about. Again, you would be reviewing the categories and subcategories. Always start at the top. And again, when we say the top, that's really in terms of the strongest level of control. That's the ECN that has the lowest number. So you should come up with one or more candidates or one or more provisions. You want to carefully read the provisions. There very well can be a lot of technical information that you would have to go through and perhaps verify that either your product has these technical features or it does not. And make notes on your diligence, on the exercise of classifying. As a compliance person, if you are ever challenged perhaps or heaven forbid audited, something like that, if the product actually would end up in the wrong hands for some reason, there could be an audit or a review, and you would want to be able to show your diligence, that the care you took to classify this article. So as you classify something, you want to have a record of it, and not self-promotion here, but in certain instances, you want the help of an expert. BIS has excellent resources, and there's also a process for obtaining a ruling. But in terms of the everyday classification, you are allowed to self-classify. But it's always helpful to, in certain cases, to retain an expert or an attorney to help you with the classification process. So, again, this is all part of consulting with another person, consulting with experts, consulting with your technical people, and you would share with them the provisions that it may fall under, and then you can go through that exercise to see what fits and what doesn't. There's not an actual one-size-fits-all approach to this. It can depend on the provision. If a provision has 5 different technical features that the product has to meet to be controlled, at least that's pretty straightforward. You can talk to your technical person and say, hey, does it meet all of these technical features or parameters? And it becomes a yes-no answer. And if the answer is no, then it would not be classified under that provision. And again, record the fact that you consulted with your technical person. Hopefully that's clear. Now let's classify an article. The article to be exported is a mirror. Okay, it sounds like a kind of a run-of-the-mill item. So why would a mirror be subject to export controls? Well, it's not a normal mirror. Okay, it's a deformable mirror used in optics in an observatory. Right there might be a clue to you that, hey, I better, make sure I understand if this thing is controlled. It's used for a highly technical use. But how would you know it's used for optics in an observatory? Well, you would have to have done some diligence within your organization to know that. So you need information on the article. What is it used in? What category of articles does it belong to? Okay, and then you would check the different subcategories, B, C, D, or E. Is it possibly a material? You would look again at the 10 categories within the ECCN, the ECCN categories. Maybe 6 sensors or lasers. Quite honestly, I don't know if I would be inclined to look there right off the bat, sensors or lasers, if it's a mirror. Again, it depends on how familiar you are with say, mirror technology, possibly navigation and avionics. Neither one of these is an obvious choice, at least to me. So let's check the index. And there is, again, we mentioned the index in here. Hooray, there is a deformable mirror listed in the index. And that's always a good thing, towards the bottom. So that gives you at least some direct guidance on the next place to look. Okay, but you're not done. You have to continue to exercise diligence and double check and make sure that there are not other possibilities under the CCL. So again, I mentioned it's a good idea to have a PDF version of the CCL open, and you can scan the whole thing with a word search. So if you search the word mirror, you'll get multiple hits. If you narrow that down to deformable, you'll get some additional hits. And here we see the first one, again, is the 6A004. And right away we see that, hey, 004, that's going to be a highly controlled item. 6A004, ECCN for optical equipment. So it looks like we're getting pretty close. The alternate provision, ECCN for spacecraft. So we see that 9A5, that 5 indicates that very well could have come over from the ITAR, from the USML. But we, at least based on our understanding, we're not dealing with spacecraft. Optical looks more promising at this point. So again, 6A004 looks most promising. So we look at that provision more carefully now. Certain deformable mirrors and the specifications must meet the technical specifications in that provision. So now you're going to look and examine closely that actual provision in the CCL. You may need a technical person to help you. But here's a reproduction of the specifics of 6A004, deformable mirrors. Again, here's some technological requirement, having an active optical aperture greater than 10 millimeter and having any of the following. So this is where you would interface with your technical people and say, yes, does our product have these features? If it does not, then it's not classified in that provision. Now, is there other possibilities? We saw the 6A, okay, if it does not meet the 6A004, is there a 6A104 or a 6A204? So, and review would indicate no, there's not, and the rest of that analysis would indicate that it does not appear to be to meet any of those requirements or specifications. Then it's likely not classified under the ECCN. Again, if it does have those features, then it would be. And we mentioned earlier about parts. I mean, again, a lot of companies we deal with, they don't make the jet engine. They don't make the chemical centrifuge. They make parts that go into them. But those parts might be controlled if the larger unit is controlled. So that's another whole exercise where you would go through and understand if the larger article is controlled, then the parts might be controlled under a parts provision. But if we determine that the mirrors are not classified anywhere under this CCL, in other words, there's no ECCN that matches that, then they would be EAR 99, and that does not require a license. So classification request, this is a process similar to under the U.S. Customs and where you can obtain a ruling, and you use this what's called SNAP-R, that's the acronym for the web portal that you upload your request to BIS. It's all done electronically, and you usually obtain a response within 30 days. Again, only applies to items under the EAR. Adam spoke of jurisdiction. If it's something controlled under the ITAR, then you'd want to know that ahead of time, just so you don't, essentially waste your time pursuing the classification as an ECCN when actually you're back in ITAR. Here is a sample And I chose this as because I could actually fit it on one page. Sometimes an ECCN provision can be several pages and be extremely complex. And this was what you could consider an innocuous sounding product, a valve. There are certainly all different kinds of valves, and you can probably assume that the types of valves that we're talking about are not the type that you turn on in the morning when you take a shower or wash your dishes, that kind of thing. And we see under the provision 2A226. So walking through that, the first 2 is the category, so that is under materials processing. So the A is either a system, equipment, or component. So it's actually going to be an article unto itself, as opposed to software or technology or some a machine that is used to make other products. So the 2A, and then the third character is 2, and that is the reason for control, and that's under nuclear non-proliferation reasons. And we see that as we fall into that little chart there where it says controls, and then it says to the right country chart. The first entry there is NP. That stands for nuclear non-proliferation. And then it relates to the country chart, NP column 1. And then I'll walk you through that country chart. But just to continue down, we see a list of license exceptions. We see here that there's various abbreviations for these, but NA means that this article would not be eligible for these listed exceptions. List of items controlled, then here's our related controls, and then follow down, and this is more inherent to the classification. Here we have a description of the items that are included, and the first is A. It would have a nominal size of 5 millimeter or greater, so that's a 1/2 centimeter. B, having a bellows seal and wholly made or lined with aluminum, aluminum alloy, nickel, or nickel alloy, etc. So this is not your typical valve. This is a valve that is made likely to be very corrosion resistant with these either aluminum or nickel alloys. It's a high-tech product, and it's likely controlled because this type of valve could be used for, say, processing of nuclear-type materials, and that's why it has these extremely corrosion-resistant construction. So another sample. Again, I'm taking kind of innocuous sounding articles, but that can also be controlled if they have certain technical, or they meet certain technical parameters. Here we are again with the cameras, and here's the reason for control. The first one is national security. So we have a 6A0. That's even lower than our last example where the third character was a 2. So we see, and then if we come down under that control chart there, table, we see NS, or national security, applies to the entire entry. And then follow over to the right under the country chart heading, NS column 2. And so I'm going to walk, again, the next slide, I believe, is the country chart. Is a description of all the types of cameras that would be covered underneath this ECCN provision. And you can see each one of these are very complex or high-tech cameras, special functions. Here there's even an exception under the first A1. If you follow down to the note, it says this does not control cinema recording cameras designed for civil purposes. So there you have a provision. It depends on the design, what the thing was designed for. So that can be important to understand when you're classifying is what was the camera you're dealing with designed for. And again, a lot of other types of cameras, and I think you get the flavor of the technology is key to the to determining the classification. Here's the first page of what's called the country chart. And as Adam mentioned, along the left-hand side here are a listing of countries, and then along the top, you see the reasons for control. And what you will do is you will basically you will follow from the country over to the right, and then from the reason for control down, and you'll wind up in a particular square of this chart. So let's back up a couple. And we see on the valve example, the first NP applies the entire entry, and it says on the other side of the line, NP column 1. So let's go back to our chart. And if we look along the top, we see NP is 1, 2, 3. That's the fourth reason for control over. And then if you follow down into that column, you'll see there's an X in most of the columns. That means that if you were exporting that product to any country that has an X in that box, then you need to obtain an export license, unless there's the item would meet a listed exception. So we can see here that Argentina is the first country where you would not require a license, followed by Australia and then Austria. On this page, again, this is alphabetical, so there's many, many more pages of other countries, but on this page, only these 3 countries would not need a license. And you can also get the flavor that countries that are friendly to the United States, that sophisticated trading partners, are more likely to not require a license for a license to be required on export, provided that there's, and these are determinations made on a case-by-case basis. If it's a truly highly controlled item, then it will be restricted for every country, even the UK or Canada possibly.